Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Recruiting for Phase 1 Clinical Trials During COVID-19 Restrictions. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can also contact me at any time by sending a message using this same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Nucleus Network, who developed the content for this presentation. Nucleus Network is the only multi-site Phase 1 clinical trials provider located in Australia and the USA. They provide high-quality, first-in-human and early-phase trials for biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies across the USA, Europe, and Asia. Located within cutting-edge health precincts, their cost-effective, accelerated clinical development solutions are supported by advanced technology, clinical excellence, and research expertise. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Joining us today from Nucleus Network is Cameron Johnson, CEO, Jeffrey Wong, Business Development Director, and Mari Ericksen, Marketing Director. And so now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to our first speaker, Cameron Johnson. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for that introduction. And obviously, thank you to everybody that has dialed in. In today's presentation, we will be discussing the impact that COVID-19 has had on the recruitment of healthy volunteers into Phase 1 clinical trials. This presentation will be based upon data we have collected over the course of the pandemic, where we can provide statistics on the impact COVID-19 has had on volunteer recruitment rates. We will also be discussing how this data has been used to pivot to a new normal, and importantly, the outlook on healthy volunteer recruitment into 2021 and beyond, as Australia's international borders continue to be closed off to the rest of the world. Before we launch into the main part of the presentation that will be delivered by Mari Ericksen, who's our Director of Marketing at Nucleus, I wanted to provide you with an introduction into the Australian COVID-19 environment and the journey we as a country have had over the course of the last 11 months. I can certainly see that we have attendees from Europe, Asia, and the USA on the line. So to provide some clarity in terms of Australia as a country, we have a total population of around about 25 million people. And of that 25 million people total, there's been 28,973 people who have actually been infected with COVID. As a percentage of the population, that's as low as 0.1% of the population of Australia have been infected with COVID. For the purpose of this presentation, the data that we will be discussing is based upon data that we have collected in Queensland and Victoria, which is where Nucleus Network operate our Phase 1 units. And also importantly, we are the only dedicated Phase 1 units in Queensland and Victoria. As a representation of Australia, these two states combined are 47% of the total population of the country. So essentially, that's 11.7 million people is the experiences that we're talking to. And then just briefly, when we do look at Victoria's COVID-19 infection rate, we can see there of a population of almost sort of 6.7 million people, there's been a COVID infection of 20,479. So as a percentage of the population, that's actually only 0.3% of the population have been infected with COVID. And then when we look at Queensland, we are as low as 0.02% infection rate in the state of Queensland. With that said, and the overall low COVID-19 infection rate in Australia, it is not surprising that Australia has seen an increase in the number of pharmaceutical, biotechnology and CRO partners wanting to conduct early phase clinical trials in Australia. From a more granular level, the extremely low community transmission makes it unlikely a study participant in Australia is going to be infected with COVID-19 during the conduct of the study. And with the government support received, business operations have been maintained throughout the entire pandemic. Essentially, Australia has not been subject to severe, widespread study disruption that has occurred in Europe and the USA for phase 1 clinical trials. As a takeaway, based upon cumulative COVID-19 cases per 1,100k population, Australia has a worldwide ranking of 178. So where our cumulative cases per 100k are 113 versus a country such as the USA, where the cumulative cases are about 8,250 per 100k population. Furthermore, given one of the absolute key aspects of being able to maintain business operations is naturally the workforce, and whilst theoretically it was unlikely the workforce would become infected with COVID with the low infection rate, it was very pleasing to see frontline workers in our phase 1 units continuing to come to work in periods of great uncertainty. And then of a workforce of approximately 450 people that we surveyed in the company, there was actually only less than 5% were actually uncomfortable coming to work during the outbreak period. And what was also very pleasing to see was that the measures that were needed to maintain a level of comfort amongst the workforce were very, very simple in nature. And as you can see to the right of that, simple things like hand sanitizer, temperature checks, increased cleaning procedures, etc., were what the workforce were telling us as a management group what they needed to feel comfortable. So all in all, a very, very positive outcome, considering the frontline workers in a phase 1 unit really are dealing with that general public. However, the success of Australia's management of COVID infections has led to other challenges in the country. Whilst this presentation is absolutely not about to debate the economic impact of Australia's stringent COVID-19 risk mitigation strategies, a flow-on effect has certainly been felt within the early phase clinical trials sector, specifically as it relates to volunteer participation and participant recruitment. As we walk through the timelines of Australia's response to COVID-19 infections, there are some significant defining moments that include the closure of international borders on the 20th of March 2020, where tourism essentially ceased, and the international backpacker and international student market being unable to enter Australia. This market is obviously of key interest to early phase clinical trials and does form a large part of the participant pool. It should also be noted that whilst Australia has had what the government calls snap lockdowns, or in other countries these would be known as shelter-ins, the COVID-19 infection rate has been largely well maintained since September of last year, with the proactive measures from government and contract tracing in place, plus other measures, have largely stopped a third wave of COVID-19 infections from gripping the country. Having provided some background to our current landscape, I will now hand over to Mari, who will take you through the impact that COVID-19 has had on volunteer participations by walking you through a timeline of what has been seen on the ground level in Melbourne and Brisbane. But more importantly, Mari will discuss the outlook for 2021 and what pharma, biotech and CRO partners can likely expect in 2021 as it relates to recruitment measures. Thanks very much, Mari.
Thanks, Cam, and hello to our audience. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to speak with you today on recruiting for phase 1 clinical trials during COVID-19 restrictions. My name is Mari Ericksen. I'm the Director of Marketing at Nucleus Network, and today I'll be covering discussion points which include pivoting around COVID-19 restrictions, unearthing and educating new local markets, and leveraging advocates and building strong partnerships. So in Q1 2020, COVID hit Australia and we saw the introduction of lockdowns and restrictions, as Cam's talked you through. Like many countries around the world, we closed our borders to international travellers and in some instances state borders as infections rose in Australian states. Now focusing on Melbourne, Victoria, where there were some of the world's most severe restrictions implemented, we can see in the bottom left graph the implementation of lockdowns in 2020, the main lockdown which lasted months for Melburnians. Some impacts of these country and state border closures. Well, looking at the latest data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the graph at the bottom right of your screen is showing Victoria's December year-on-year international short-term visitor arrivals. Now that's people travelling for 1 year or less within Australia. We can see that this group of travellers ceased arriving during Q2 of 2020, and this flatlining really continues until today. And the data really doesn't get much better for long-term visitors arriving to Victoria, and that's people travelling for 1 year or more, as there were only 300 in December 2020. Now that was a decrease of 97% year-on-year. Now, this brought about a significant change to our typical participant population composition, with the rapid loss of the transient backpacker traveller market, as well as the loss of 1/3 of Victoria's university student market. Now, higher education is one of Victoria's largest exports, and international students make up approximately 1/3 of Melbourne's university student population. And to put this impact into context, in December 2020, there were only 40 international student arrivals in Victoria. Now, this was a year-on-year decrease of nearly 14,000 international students. That's 99.7%, which is astonishing. As you can imagine, this has severely impacted the education sector as well. Also, as part of Nucleus's COVID plan, we capped our participant recruitment age limit to 59 years. Now, in addition to this, there was a clear change in population behaviours with our local population. Due to COVID-19, there was increasing fear in the community. People became more risk averse, as like people did around the world, and socialised less with a reluctance to leave their home. And this message was definitely pushed by the government as well with a stay-at-home message. It was a lockdown, and this caused uncertainty in our market. People were unsure if clinics were open, erring on the side of caution. We also noticed a change in media consumption by the local population. The public were consuming more digital media, streaming more services, series and movies. Typical traditional out-of-home media, such as billboards and public transport advertising, became redundant, especially with people staying at home, and the community aversion to taking public transport. So it's not all doom and gloom. We took charge and some impactful initiatives were implemented to address these changes. Firstly, as Melbourne and Brisbane are Australia's second and third most populous cities, we could swiftly and easily pivot engagement to those sizable local populations. Knowing these markets were new to clinical trials, our recruitment team activated increased lead nurturing and management tactics, implementing a VIP treatment. We also expanded Nucleus's marketing team to include dedicated media expertise to launch major targeted PR campaigns for our COVID and non-COVID recruitment campaigns, seizing the opportunity to further communicate the importance of clinical trials, dispel myths, and educate the market about the participant journey. Our new participant communication strategy ensured we communicated Nucleus Network as an essential service, except from travel restrictions in lockdowns, as well as precautions taken to ensure their safety through our advanced COVID plan. So in short, we shifted tactics from typical lead generation activities to education and awareness campaigns attracting local markets. Our targeted PR approach included media releases and actively targeted influential media and journalists writing on core topics. Importantly, having a respected, available and highly capable media talent in our infectious disease expert, Associate Professor Paul Griffin, we were able to secure a substantial amount of news stories, approximately 4,000 media articles in 2020, reaching over 1.8 billion people worldwide during 2020. This continues in 2021, given the really strong relationships we've built with our media. Dr. Rick Griffin was used as a trusted voice. He won an award called the Gold Stevie Award for Media Hero of 2020. Paul, and I quote, was nominated for his tireless efforts to keep the Australian population safe and well informed since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic. In every media interview, Paul presents a calm, reassuring response, reinforcing public health measures in a friendly and easy to understand way. Now, a notable highlight included Paul Griffin being invited to speak alongside Australia's Deputy Prime Minister for his opinion and commentary, further cementing his standing and voice. Now, if we look at the bottom left graph, this shows a substantial increase in media mentions in green and social media mentions in blue, ultimately providing Nucleus with a platform to engage with and secure this new untapped market. And on the right, you will see a number of core trending themes that we noticed in the media, and we would leverage these themes and make sure that we were using them, especially core words, in our announcements. However, how did we unearth new markets? So we needed to identify and understand these new local audiences, and therefore we carried out market research through focus groups. And this was done virtually as lockdowns had begun. Now, we wanted to understand their fears and barriers towards clinical trials and create personas for these new markets. So this included their personal background, how old are they single, married, are they a full-time student, do they live in home with their parents in Melbourne's eastern suburbs, do they have siblings? And we really need to know their understand their values, interests and goals. You know, is it their family and friends? Do they want to be a homeowner, for example? And what were their media habits? You know, where do they get their information? Is it TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook? And do they watch streaming series or streaming services such as Stan, Disney, Netflix? I mean, who doesn't watch Netflix? So what we found interesting was that a male aged 25 and living in Melbourne differed greatly to a backpacker with the same demographics and therefore had to be engaged with differently. We also needed to educate the community that Nucleus Network is an essential service and exempt from restrictions. This was carried out through a variety of creatives, and I have one example for you on the screen. So Ryan, if you could please play the video when you're ready.
To get the world back to normal.
I wanted to give something back to the community and help us getting out of this as fast as possible.
About my art.
Thank you, Ryan. So these campaigns were warmly embraced by the local community. We boosted new quality leads and they showed a commitment to participate in clinical trials. However, the local market was also pivoting to changing COVID restrictions across many levels, 1 to 4, and the opportunity to return to work. As a result, as you can see, we saw an increase in cancellations due to notable reasons. So in addition to these mini campaigns, a major education and awareness campaign, Become a Life Changer, was launched in Melbourne and Brisbane. The multi-state campaign aimed to raise awareness and educate the community on clinical trials, attracting new, informed and quality leads to participate. We also used new messaging and a diverse group of relatable people with a variety of jobs. One was a student. Our focus was on medical advancement and the importance of clinical trials for a variety of trials, not just COVID. And we invested heavily in testing new digital channels to engage participants beyond Facebook and Instagram, such as Google AdWords, podcasts, the streaming services, Spotify, Snapchat, and TikTok, to name a few. So these campaigns were warmly embraced, boosting new quality leads, who showed a commitment to participate in our clinical trials. However, the local market was pivoting during the restrictions and the return to work opportunities. As a result, as you can see from this graph, we saw an increase in cancellation due to one notable reason, and that was work commitments. So what was promising was that the graph shows that there was not a lot of increase in changing mind due to PICF, mainly due to their changing lifestyles and the changes in restrictions with the government. With the state borders also reopening at Christmas time, many friends and families took this much anticipated opportunity to visit loved ones interstate. Many for the first time since the start of 2020. So to combat this, we developed Remember Your Appointments campaigns, encouraging people to remember and keep their commitment. We have been comforted with the decrease and strong downward trend of people now cancelling due to work commitments. With the routine of the year now underway, with university returning and workplaces opening, we project this downward trend will continue. So the Remember Your Appointments campaign, including animations on the website, graphics in email signatures on participant-facing roles at Nucleus, such as our recruitment officers and our CRC team, as well as posters in the clinic to really reinforce on-study participants the need to attend their outpatient visits. We also felt the need to develop a suite of fact sheets on study types, such as biosimilars, and also medical procedures for certain studies. And this was done to really better inform the participants on what to expect on a trial. So moving forward, continual communication and partnerships with government, media and industry to inform and advise and advocate for clinical trials will continue to form a core tactic in our engagement strategy. During 2020, we have been assisting political representatives in understanding the impact and importance of clinical trials, as well as showing how they can communicate this to their constituents. Our sponsors' agreement to work with us on media opportunities has been effective, often distributing joint media releases. And what I have here is the graph below shows a really good example of the impact of what can be achieved through strong relationships with working with government and sponsors. The last peak represents a spike of 7,000 leads that we secured over 2 days in Brisbane of people aged 56 years plus, with a media launch that we delivered with the government and the sponsor. So establishing a list of friendly journalists definitely help us secure this type of impact. And we really work with these journalists to secure positive news stories and through trusted media outlets. One thing that I think around the world that we've noted is that people are glued to their screens. They want to hear what's going on. And while there should have been a fatigue of COVID news, the story keeps changing, so people are interested. We also will keep seizing awareness opportunities and really leveraging from the changing sentiment about clinical trials. Never has there been such a great time to talk about clinical trials. Starting at Nucleus about 14 months ago, I could never have imagined that this would allow me the opportunity to put what we do on a global stage through media and really educate the world. And the media analytics show the spikes in media and social mentions. So implementing a strong social media strategy that targets people who fulfill the age, interest, location and other requirements is key. This is our second major area, and this is where people get their news. And there has been issues lately with the Facebook regulations in Australia, which I believe are changing, but every news story has a social echo where it's shared online, and that's really important. And we'll be searching out new opportunities to engage with potential participants in COVID-19 safe virtual world and a non-virtual world now that things have really opened up more in Australia. Now, I wanted to thank you for your time today. I'm very happy to answer any questions at the end of the webinar. In the meantime, let me hand you over to our very experienced Director of Business Development, Jeffrey Wong. Jeff.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Mari. Thanks for the very insightful and educational presentation. And hi to everyone. My name is Jeffrey Wong, and I'm the Business Director of Business Development at Nucleus Network. And thank you for taking time to join us during this presentation. The few topics that I'll be covering today is basically to discuss how COVID-19 has affected B2B activities. Also, the continuous need to raise awareness of business continuity and ongoing capabilities at Nucleus. And also the need for collaborating with clients and other stakeholders to increase public awareness. And last but not the least, is also to explain how BD needs to align and work synergistically with our marketing team so that we can then continuously perform all the activities that Mari has so kindly explicitly explained to everyone earlier just a moment ago. So I'll just jump straight into it. All right, so how has COVID-19 affected B2B activities? The pandemic has definitely created a heightened anxiety amongst members of the industry, where sponsors are more risk averse, understandably, due to the uncertainty. Sponsors are regularly now asking for site mitigation steps. In the case of Nucleus, we are unique and fortunate that we are able to have a secondary site that we could offer as a backup site should one of our sites is compromised. And as Cameron has highlighted earlier on, there are obviously other risk mitigation and infection control policies, guidelines that we have implemented across both our facilities in Melbourne as well as in Brisbane. Operationally, during the height of the pandemic, some of the projects were delayed due to enrollment demographic, such as those requiring participants that are aged 60 years and above. And of course, there's also a concern for administering investigational product, which could be immunosuppressive. Hence, certain studies have to be postponed or delayed due to those factors that I've just alluded. Since the start of the pandemic, we have also experienced a rise in requests for sites in Australia to be rescue sites. And this is largely due to the impact of COVID-19 being more severe and widespread in other regions, such as North America and Europe, where some sites have to shut down completely or severely restrict participant visitations. Another tangible impact is an overnight transition of face-to-face conferences and seminars to virtual and digital platforms. Consequently, there's a need to manage different time zones. Engagement during partnering events has become a bit more rigid. And of course, very naturally, there is a decrease of first-hand exposure and understanding of local culture of the respective hosting city and country, having not been able to visit in person. However, on the flip side, there is some pros. The virtual platform has provided more partnering opportunities to occur outside of official event period. So that's actually a bonus. Throughout the pandemic, Nucleus has also increased our engagement with government bodies, particularly the state government, to understand the implications of certain restrictions, as well as to dialogue over best practices in infection control. As a result of the impact noted, as I've just discussed or reviewed earlier, there's also a need to increase dialogue with potential and existing clients to inform them of the evolving landscape in Australia, which I'll cover more in the next slide. This is a diagram that was earlier highlighted by Cameron, and what this chart highlights is the pandemic timeline, which is interjected with various movement restrictions, such as national lockdown, sheltering in, as Cameron has said, state border closures, and statewide lockdown. And whenever you hear all of this restrictions being declared, there's heightened anxiety in terms of what that entails. So instead of being passive, there's continuous joint efforts between the BD team as well as our project management team at Nucleus in raising awareness amongst various stakeholders whenever changes or restrictions occur. This is typically done shortly, usually same day, if not the following day after the official announcement of the restrictions have been made. This is to proactively dispel any uncertainties surrounding Nucleus's business continuity as an essential service provider, as well as to highlight what each of these periods of restrictions mean. Stakeholders receiving such communications include existing clients who wants to know whether their trial will be impacted. Can it go ahead? Does it need to be stopped? Partnering CROs, who are interested to see whether we are still operational, as well as, more importantly, participants. Now, the latter particularly helps in retaining participants and minimize any significant deviation from protocol required visits. Due to the heightened fluidity in unit scheduling as a result of the pandemic as well, this has provided Nucleus the opportunity to sometimes actually bring certain programs forward, as some studies have to be postponed during the height of the pandemic itself. Collaborating with clients and other stakeholders to increase public awareness. Aside from the traditional approach to business development activities, which are solely focusing on promoting of Nucleus capabilities of experience, there is also an emphasis now on collaboration with clients and other stakeholders to increase public awareness and the importance of R&D work. To that end, there's been active seeking of opportunities to produce content with both local and international partners. The acceptance of this approach is so far been very positive, especially knowing that such content can drive up participation in those respective clinical trials, if not provide the partner with a media outlet to attract potential investors. Additionally, we have also partnered with stakeholders to release COVID-19 white papers, such as the one on impact of COVID-19 in volunteer interest, for example, or the 10 steps to successfully navigating your next clinical trial. And these are all available within the website of Nucleus Network. Some of these joint efforts have resulted in webinar series, virtual seminars, and sometimes they might not even necessarily involve a client, but rather other service providers which complement the service scope needed to realize a particular clinical trial in the likes of a data management CRO or a bioanalytical lab. Lastly, I just want to highlight how there is now a rising importance in aligning and working synergistically with our marketing team in the likes of Mari and her team. As Nucleus Network continues to undertake various programs, some of which have high public interest, such as COVID-19 vaccines or therapeutics, as you can see from that diagram with the world map and how we have been involved integrally in the development of early phase vaccine for COVID-19, or even other high-profile therapeutic areas. These all remain as potential leverage points that could enhance public awareness and help negate the impact of COVID-19 in participant recruitment. As such, there's continuous alignment within the BD team to identify new content opportunities for clinical trial promotion and to work closely with marketing team to explore novel platforms to leverage on these new opportunities. To that, I mean, what will be the takeaway from today's presentation? I think firstly, it's good for us to understand that the number of people registering and expressing interest to be part of clinical trial continues to be at an all-time high. And this is well supported by the population in both Melbourne and Brisbane, which totals approximately 7.5 million, approximately 30% of Australia's population. However, the pandemic has resulted in the emergence of a new local market, and this new demographic requires continuous engagement and nurturing to be educated in undertaking of clinical trials. Given the media coverage of the pandemic throughout the whole of 2020 and beyond, interest in medical research is higher than ever amongst the general public, and harnessing this for clinical trials requires innovative approaches. Hence, a bespoke approach to recruitment will allow clinical trials to progress along an acceptable timeline. And lastly, from Nucleus' perspective, we are definitely seeing the downstream impact in 2021 from all the investment in new strategies from 2020 that has now stabilized the participant market. So with that, I want to say thank you once again for your time. And there will be a Q&A segment after this, so we would love to have a dialogue with you thereafter. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I would like to invite our audience to continue sending their questions or comments right now using the questions window for the Q&A portion of this webinar. Now, I've already received some questions, so we will get ourselves started with those. Our very first question would simply like to know when you first identified changes in the participant pool makeup.
I can take that one, Ryan. When lockdown began, so when the first lockdown was announced, we noticed some of our participant population were returning to their home countries. This was also very evident in national news broadcasts of travellers and international students returning home. Also, April, November, during lockdown, we found people, new markets were engaging and committing when restrictions started to lift.
Excellent, thank you very much. Our next question would like to know that if you think this approach would work in the USA.
I think it would. The launch of the education awareness campaign was very impactful, but the USA is a very different market. So we would obviously use different messaging. For example, target large unemployment population, raise awareness of the process and the benefits, such as free and comprehensive health checkup. I think that would be one different angle we would take.
That's very good. Thank you very much. Our next question asks, does international traveler constitute a significant portion of your volunteers?
Look, it typically does, but as we've proven with our ability to engage with the local markets, we don't need the international traveller. So whilst it does, many areas around the world have been impacted by this lack of international traveller market, and we've proven that we've not only been able to engage with the local audience, but when the borders do open up, our population pool will be bigger and greater than ever. So I think it does, but we're really excited to work with our local populations who are proving to commit.
Great, thank you. Our next question then asks if you could describe any state or national support from the government.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, I mean, it's fair to say that in the states of Victoria and Queensland, there has been significant sort of government support for the organisation, particularly with the number of COVID-19 vaccine studies that we've been involved in. It's really put, I guess, clinical research at the forefront of government's minds. And, whilst obviously COVID-19 is a, terrible pandemic, there are still a lot of unmet medical needs out there where sort of, drug development in other areas, it still needs to continue. And that's certainly the approach that really government have taken with Nucleus. So that's where we've been able to maintain that essential status. So whilst there were, as Mari and Jeff alluded to, very strict lockdowns or shelter-ins that the US is more familiar with, we maintain business operations, and as Jeff mentioned, it was really getting those letters to participants and also to our employees where they were able to travel freely between home and the clinical facility. So all in all, there has been great government support in the continuing operations and the look beyond COVID, that what medical research does is very important, and that it shouldn't be, other indications shouldn't be halted because of the pandemic.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question would like to know, are Australian phase 1 units booked out?
Good question. So just on that, I think sort of the message we take to clients is that if they're well planned, then in our opinion, I mean, Nucleus, we're 150 beds, we're about 65% of all the phase 1 beds in Australia. So from our perspective, that if companies are planned, they'll certainly be able to get into clinic. And what we mean by planned is that typically we suggest to clients that they want to be well engaged about 12 weeks before their first patient first dose. So, it is fair to say that Q2 is relatively busy. However, once you move into the Q3s and the Q4s of this year, we're certainly very comfortable that there is good capacity to be able to meet the sponsors' requirements. So short term, sure, if you're looking at getting into clinic in the next 6 to 8 weeks, my advice would be you'll struggle, but certainly if you're planning for Q3, Q4, then absolutely there is good capacity in Australia.
Very good, thank you. Our next question then would like to know if you could elaborate on the COVID-19 vaccine rollout plan in Australia.
Well, I'll I'll take that one. So in terms of the rollout, so depending what people have read in the media and where you are in the world, so the vaccine rollout started in Australia on Sunday, so a few days ago now, and obviously similar, taking a tiered system approach that the likes of Europe and the US have taken in terms of vaccinations of obviously the more vulnerable, and obviously your frontline healthcare workers. In terms of any sort of larger rollout, particularly sort of as it relates to the participant pool that you would bring into a phase 1 clinical trial, we don't really expect that rollout to occur really until sort of Q4 of this year. So we certainly know that we are in active discussions with quite a number of clients that are wanting to get COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials ran in the next kind of 6 months, and will they still have a population to vaccinate the naive to the approved vaccination? The answer is yes. We don't sort of see the main rollout occurring till the latter half.
Well, thank you very much, Cameron, and all of you, thank you for your time and for your answers to all of those questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for all of our questions today. Now, if we couldn't attend to all of them, the team at Nucleus Network will follow up with you, or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's on your screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm also about to send you a link in the chat box, and with this link, you'll be able to view the recording of this event on this page, and you can also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording here as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join me one more time in thanking our speakers, Cameron Johnson, Jeffrey Wong, and Mari Ericksen. We hope that you all found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.